Hello and welcome to the Yggdrasil podcast. I am your host, Redditosker. Today we have Commonwealth Realms, a popular Zelda YouTuber. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Before we get started, I want to make sure everybody knows that we are not going to be discussing the art book leaks for Tears of the Kingdom. We are going to be discussing Zelda, and we might discuss a little bit about the effect that the leaks have on creating lore videos and creating content in a post-leak world, but the actual leaks, we're not going to be talking about them. So, Commonwealth, how long have you been a Zelda fan? What was your first
Zelda
one?
fan?
Yeah.
First one, I think it's been like many in my generation since I was born in 1992. It's Ocarina of Time. N64, 1998. It's just a classic, and it's a game that the franchise was not able to get out of the shadow of for a very long time. In fact, all the way, I would say, to Breath of the Wild, which managed to sort of make something of its own that was even more popular, even bigger. It remained my favorite game of both Zelda and Nintendo up to that point. So Breath of the Wild really did a true revolution in order to get us out of that era of Ocarina of Time in games, because almost all 3D Zelda games after that were following in the footsteps of Ocarina of Time.
Is Ocarina of Time your favorite still, or have you changed your mind?
I would say Breath of the Wild is my favorite, but every time I do a comparison with Breath of the Wild, I realize there are elements of Zelda I prefer from the old. Like every time you compare dungeons, every time you compare story, pacing, key, what would I say, attributes to Zelda that simply were lacking in Breath of the Wild. Like there's this notion that Breath of the Wild is probably one of the best open world games ever made. But as a Zelda, it just lacks that magic that was established by Ocarina, and which I feel like were unnecessarily removed. I feel like Ocarina still has that edge over Breath of the Wild, and I hope that Tears of the Kingdom will be able to address that, so that we can move on from those nitpicks when it comes to the new style of Zelda.
I'm new to Zelda YouTubing, but the first video that I made on the subject was basically addressing the fact that Breath of the Wild really was a game changer, and it shifted the landscape so much that there's a lot of people that were like, okay, well, wait a minute, what about all this other stuff from the older titles that I liked that for the most part aren't present in Breath of the Wild, namely the dungeons, the type of storytelling, and so because of that, and because I made another video later on down the line talking about how I was a little disappointed in the latest trailer and the amount of information that we got from it. The kind of people that are in my audience, I think I've attracted almost all of the negative Nancys of in the Zelda community, because I don't see anybody else. I didn't see anybody else saying that they didn't like the trailer, so I got backlash for that. But I do think that now my audience consists of a large proportion of all the people that are like looking at Tears of the Kingdom, not even necessarily negatively, but suspiciously. You know, they're looking at it suspiciously. They're not fully committed yet.
Well, from my perspective, I think just the Zelda team has been holding back literally everything about this game. We have seen 5 minutes or so of footage of a game that's probably going to be 100 hours from start to finish, just a beat. I have a feeling that this is going to be a longer game than Breath of the Wild, mainly because of how the game is going to be structured, how you get around the different types of objectives, and of course the premise itself. Breath of the Wild barely had a villain. This one made it very clear in this previous trailer that yes, we do have a villain, and it's Ganondorf, and it's a Ganondorf who is more pissed than ever, which is great for all of us who love this franchise.
Yeah, it seems to be going in all the right directions for me. In a later video, I talked about how, and I saw a video of yours. As I was looking through your channel, where you seem to also be very pro dungeon. You also seem to be very pro iconic villain and bosses. Uh, so do you think we're going to get that? Do you think we're going to get dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom?
Well, personally, I think the Zelda team is well aware that going with the Divine Beast route again, without any sort of dungeons, or at least combining one and the other, is going to be met with some backlash. You can be forgiven for doing this once, but I think people are not ready to say goodbye to Zelda, and instead just go for just another open world franchise. Because as much as I love exploring Hyrule, and I love the fact that you can go back to this world and continue playing, even though you finished the game years ago on the same save file and playthrough, I feel like this Breath of the Wild lacked those highlights, those gameplay highlights that previous Zelda games delivered on. Like the lack of enemies within divine beasts, shrines being limited to only different types of guardians. It just felt like a lesser Zelda in the areas where Zelda didn't need any changing. It was the best in the industry, but now it has been surpassed by miles by Elden Ring. So I hope that they have seen the praise that Elden Ring has received for their dungeon design, and also the criticism that they have received from different Zelda tubers, Nintendo tubers, or gamers at all. Like, I think the one that summarized the best the problem of the dungeons, or the lack thereof, in Breath of the Wild was Game Maker's Toolkit, the Boss Keys episode on the Divine Beasts. It explained that this is no replacement for dungeons, and if this is the new path for it, then the best of Zelda's puzzle solving and dungeons are behind us, and we definitely don't want to get there.
Yeah, I have to agree completely. I mean, look, the the open world exploration of Breath of the Wild really, I really do think it was revolutionary. I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
Elden Ring would have been what it was if it wasn't for Breath of the Wild paving that path forward. They have a lot of similarities. They both were more authored experiences. They were more focused on a single linear path kind of games, and they both transitioned into the open world genre quite well. The difference is that Elden Ring chose to keep its legacy dungeons, the things that they were known for the most, its iconic level design and legacy dungeons. They kept that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they evolved on it. First time you see Stormvale Castle or Leyendale, the royal capital, it blows your mind how much better they are than some of their earlier dungeon designs. It's incredible. I think it's some of their best work. Uh, there's-
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
especially when it comes to the underground sections of Elden Ring, it really showed the potential of the underground. I think in Tears of the Kingdom as well. Like, it's hard to expect the same thing because of the fact that you also have a third layer in the sky, which seems to be either the shrine replacement, or, like, personally I would prefer the sky to be a thing of its own and not just be, oh, it's shrines but in the sky, because that on itself would sort of remove the joy of exploring them, because it's just going to be about, oh yeah, you complete this puzzle, get this reward, and get back on the surface. I don't want that, because that is just going to be those closed artificial boxes that we had in the Sheikah shrines. And as much as I loved the Sheikah shrines, I felt like there were just too many of them. They came at the expense of the dungeons. And I think they just need to strike a better balance. And with a sequel that is all about combinations, well, why not combine it with the staples that worked from the past with what works in the present? You now have a template. You now have a template, so
Mhm.
go for it.
Yeah. There's an interesting quote by Eiji Onuma when he was talking about the success of Breath of the Wild, and how they were somewhat surprised by how successful it was, and they're happy that Breath of the Wild was this game that broke conventions. They shied away from conventions. It's the unconventional Zelda game, but it was so successful that he's worried. Well, is this going to become a convention now? And it's like, maybe that's probably something that we want to avoid. Something along those lines is what he said. And I think of that, and it's like, what would be unconventional? You break the convention that you started in Breath of the Wild, and go back a little. Like you took 4 steps forward, maybe take 1 step back, and that's the sweet spot, I think. Like, because I agree with you specifically on the shrines. I don't have any real problem with the shrines. The problem I had was with, well, basically what you said about that Game Maker's Toolkit video, that the dungeons are, in Breath of the Wild aren't adequate replacements for the dungeons that we had before. Each dungeon had its own musical theme. It had its own aesthetic theme. It had its own kind of enemies that were in the dungeon. It had its own type of challenges in it. Even just removing the linearity and removing the puzzles of the dungeon, the fact that there's this area to explore with this very rich atmosphere, that you can engross yourself in. You can spend a half an hour to an hour like just puzzling out how to do it while you're engrossed in this biome, not biome, a atmosphere that reflects the outside biome of the dungeon. It was great. It was wonderful, I thought. I'm not ready to give that up, and especially not if what our replacement is going to be things like divine beasts and shrines going forward.
Yes, I think we're on the same page here. My main problem and concern with Tears of the Kingdom is not what we have not seen yet. It's the fear of everything just being the same, but this time, instead of being like more baked earth, as they talked about the Jomon design for the divine beast, just being more rocks for the Zonai. Like, I hope that the dungeons actually have a theme, have a variety, because the surroundings you're in Zelda has a lot to say for your immersion. It has a lot to say for your motivation to start solving a complex puzzle. And especially when we came from a game like Skyward Sword, as the previous 3D Zelda before Breath of the Wild, it just felt like such a downgrade, going from these amazing themed environments with real-life connotations, and just massive levels of creativity when it came to interior and exterior design. Like the way you were exploring them on the inside and outside, especially the sand ship is just a brilliant dungeon, until you get to the boss fight, of course.
Of course. It's hilarious because Skyward Sword, for all the criticism that it got on release from people, not necessarily from professional reviewers, its dungeons were probably some of the best in the series. Like, really great dungeons on almost every one that knocked out of the park. The sand ship you mentioned, but even the areas around the sand ship, like the lead up to the sand ship, like doing all of the things that you would need to get to the sand ship was kind of a dungeon on its own. The Ancient Cistern, one of my personal favorites. Incredible stuff. It is just, Breath of the Wild, you can't compare it. Incomparable. I have to believe that Nintendo is paying attention. Like, it seems like Nintendo is the company that pays attention. When they thought that the GameCube wasn't selling well and they thought that people didn't like Wind Waker, if anything, they overcorrected. They're like, oh, they hate Wind Waker. Let's make a gritty, realistic Twilight Princess, which, a lot of people love Twilight Princess. It was the best-selling Zelda game before Breath of the Wild. But still, it was a situation where they didn't wait to see how beloved Wind Waker was going to end up being in the future. They're like, oh, they didn't like it. Let's shift to something else in a radically different direction. So there has to be dungeons. Is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, like I think the Zelda team is well aware that critics, those who decide how well the game is received and also decides their chances of winning Game of the Year again, will be on the lookout when it comes to what was lacking in Breath of the Wild. And people were very clear. It was enemy variety,
right?
It was the lack of dungeons, and it was the lack of boss variety, and a horrible, and I mean horrible, final boss.
Right.
That I feel a lot of reviewers just simply let themselves be blinded by the incredible open world, and at the same time forgot to ask themselves, what was the key to Zelda before we got here?
Right.
And what of that is fulfilled in Breath of the Wild? The answer is not so much when you think of it. And that is the scary part about Breath of the Wild. It's a game that watered down Zelda to make it more like... I hate to use this comparison, but sort of a GTA sandbox where you can do whatever you want, make some experiments, and And yes, of course, that is very popular, but it doesn't reflect the soul and depth that Zelda used to be famous for the 30 years and so prior. So, I really hope that we are able to combine the best of the present and the best of the past. That is my philosophy for this game, and hope and expectations for Tears of the Kingdom is that they manage to strike that balance and deliver for both camps, because that is how you go forward. That way you are able to sell as most copies of the game as possible, which is what this is all about at the end of the day. You make as many people possible, you avoid getting lower review scores, which also helps your chances of winning rewards, and hence also create the basis for growth and even bigger success in the future.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think we have evidence that that is the direction that they're going to. They seem to have already taken a few steps in the right direction when it comes to the boss in the DLC. Monk Master, what was his name? Koga?
Monk Master Kosha. Yeah.
Kosha, yeah. So yeah, he's an incredible boss, and the combat in boss battles in previous Zelda games was very easy. It's always been very easy, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with skill, with the possible exception of Skyward Sword. But apart from that one, really bosses were just puzzles, dramatic puzzles. They were very dramatic puzzles. But once you figure it out, of course, the boss is easy. But in Breath of the Wild, I think they had the opportunity, especially with Monk Master Kosha, where they really mixed together a lot of the elements that made old bosses really great. For example, a unique appearance, a unique aesthetic, cool boss music, and also interesting mechanics with the boss that combines your abilities. So you could beat him just with straight skill, of course. So and that was an important element. I think you could just sword slash him to death, but you could also take advantage of the opportunities, figure out how your abilities interact with some of his moves, which I thought was just cool. It was incredibly cool. A very excellent way of combining old and new. I would love if Tears of the Kingdom has more of that along those lines.
Yes, I think the final DLC especially was a clear indication of the direction that the Zelda team wanted to go with the sequel, which is a very good sign, because Monk Master Kosha is one of, if not the best Zelda bosses of all time.
Right.
Both when it comes to the different stages, the fluidity of it, the arena where you fought up in the sky. Like it felt like a tease of the next game, and a lot of that premise has now been fulfilled with Tears of the Kingdom. So if that is the new level for boss fights, then I would say problem solved. My main concern is actually in the latest trailer. It's that malice explosion that we see, which is typical to the blights that we saw also in Breath of the Wild. And I really hope that this is not another game where we just battle a bunch of blights again, or malice monsters, because I think one of the coolest things in Zelda is not knowing what awaits you behind that door. And I feel like Breath of the Wild just ruined that completely, both when it came in the case of entering the Divine Beast, when it came to fight the boss, because you knew more or less how this enemy will look like. And that's also why my disappointment when I finally saw Calamity Ganon, even though it's a good fight, no doubt a good fight, but the design, it just feels so uninspired. When in Zelda's past, every boss felt differently, and it felt like each of them were individuals, not just spawns of something else, which I hope we'll be able to return back to, because I understand that Breath of the Wild was all about repairing what went wrong 100 years ago, free the spirits trapped in the Divine Beasts, and so on. So yes, it's good that I guess you could pull off that once, but just don't do that again. Because I think Zelda is at its strongest when it surprises the player.
Yeah. Even if Like, I have no problem with the malice idea itself. Like, malice goes and corrupts something, and it taints it, and now it becomes a boss. But, you know, Twilight Princess did something similar with the fused shadow pieces that you had to go and collect. Like, you would go into a dungeon, and you know that a fused shadow's somewhere in here, and the boss had somehow absorbed the fused shadow, and it had changed them and turned them into a boss. But they were all quite distinct, and there was nothing about them that linked them to fused shadow, like, Twilight technology specifically. Like, it was so you know, the boss in the second dungeon was Daruk. No, not Daruk. The big Goron guy, the boss in the second dungeon.
Yeah, Virus.
Yes.
Virus.
Yes. You know, he was you know, aesthetically unique. Like, you didn't expect him to look like that. The boss in the third dungeon was also corrupted by a fused shadow, or he had a fused shadow to strengthen. Was giant fish underwater. Like, there was nothing about them that was tying them together aesthetically necessarily, which I thought was a good thing.
Yeah, I think in every past 3D Zelda games prior to Breath of the Wild, each boss felt like, one, it was a surprise when you fought it, but secondly, they just fit the environment you were in. The lights just felt like, oh, it's just another spawn of the calamity. Wow. Like, Zelda, as I mentioned now, I can say this to death, but it's all about variety. It's all about keeping things fresh. It's all about, because that's also what is key to the pacing of the game. Like, if the player starts falling off, whether it is because of repetitive design, whether that is visual or in the game design, I feel like that is a sign of fatigue that you want to avoid, even though you have an amazing varied open world surrounding it all. But I feel like, why not make everything this varied as the world itself? Because the strength of Zelda was going into a forest area and expecting overgrown temple that is just full of exciting enemies. Like, I also loved the surprise that we got in Skyview Temple, the first temple of Skyward Sword, and you probably expect, oh, it's just going to be some plant or monster or something, because that's usually how it goes, or it's going to be Goma. No, it was Girahim.
Wonderful.
And that's the kind. Yeah, and it's like, yes, you fight this boss multiple times, but it's a person that you get sort of attached to, and also love to hate.
Yeah,
and
very
I want
invested.
That is exactly what I want to see in Tears of the Kingdom. Like, maybe a side character villain that returns multiple times and annoys us, but also in many ways hypes up his master, just like Girahim was doing in the case of Demise. Of course, Demise was not able to match the fabulousness of Girahim.
Of course.
But I feel like Ganondorf will not have the same problem as Demise, because, yes, I think Demise might have something to do at this game at a certain point.
Right. Yeah, we can talk about that in
yeah.
But you know, I completely agree with you. Like, that this was really, there is three things, I think, and every comment that I read that's a criticism, it's always one of these three things. People complain about the dungeons and the lack thereof. They complain about the boss variety. You know, they compare or the enemy variety, but we'll put that together. Or they complain about not a charismatic central antagonist. You know, there was an incredible central antagonist in Girahim. Like, at least he was the face of everything for most of the thing. He was loquacious. He was arrogant. He had a mouth on him. Let's say he was great.
And a tongue.
Yeah, and a tongue as well. You know, you had Zant in Twilight Princess, and Zant's first appearance. You know, when he shows up and he like curses Link to stay in wolf form, and he like drags Midna into the light realm where she's mortally wounded. That was an incredible scene. Like, stuff like that is, I think, what people feel was missing in Tears of the Kingdom. And I've always felt like there's really no need for this. Like, there's nothing about Breath of the Wild's core design that necessarily excludes the existence of any of the things that we've been talking about so far. Like, like dungeons, like bosses, like enemy variety, or like interesting and charismatic central villains to face against.
Yeah, and I think also it hurts Breath of the Wild's replay value, because why do you replay games? It is to replay, well, the highlights. It is the dungeons. Like, this game was all about discovery, but when you have done that discovery once, well, what is there to play there anymore? It's just the same shrine design. The shrine design never changes. It's still the blue tech walls that times 120.
Same music in the shrines.
Exactly. The divine beasts are literally the 4 same shells with a little bit of a different exterior, some different puzzles, but otherwise lacks the keys that we're used to in Zelda dungeons. They lacked a dungeon item. And as cool as it is to get all the tools at the beginning of the game, I feel like there is a way to combine it. Give Link give him his starting tools, but also expand the gameplay by adding some puzzles in dungeons that you will be able to take back to the overworld and try to solve the same things in a different way, maybe more efficient way. Like, it's all about experimentation, and giving more tools just creates more opportunities, more possibilities for the player. And I think that is the key of Tears of the Kingdom, not giving you the option of making cars or whatever vehicle came out of the Industrial Revolution. I feel like that is the wrong perspective. Of course, it could be fun. Like, moving around vertically is probably going to be lots of fun. But I feel like the main emphasis needs to be on the key aspects of why you want to replay this game and start a new playthrough from scratch.
So you just said something really interesting there. Let's move to this. Do you think, let's assume the dungeons will be implemented. How do you think they'll go about implementing the dungeons? Do you think they'll be linear like they were before, or what?
My fear is that it's going to be the similar interior design, maybe have a little bit different colors, but just to distinguish them a little bit. But I don't think it's going to be as drastic as it's been in past games. So I hope I'm wrong. But I have a feeling that it's like, oh yeah, we had this ancient Sheikah theme in that game, so this time we're going to have a Zonai theme. So all the temples are just going to be Zonai. I think the main benefit of previous Zelda games was that no dungeon was one specific tied to one specific tribe or one specific race. And if that is the case in Tears of the Kingdom, then we know what to expect, unfortunately. Even though the dungeons inside can be amazing, for me, it's all about the theme. It's all about the interior. And if all the dungeons are just Zonai, they could be some of the best Zelda dungeons ever, but will they be as memorable? That is my main issue with this, because in all of the Zelda games, it felt like each dungeon belonged to each tribe, and they had the responsibility for it.
Yeah. I really hope that your fear is misplaced, because that like when you go back and you think about what is the most memorable moments in dungeons, you'll remember getting stuck in a particular puzzle. Like, you'll remember the color in the area. You remember the greenery. You'll remember the aesthetic. You remember that in things like but your fear is like there'll be Zonai themed 5 or 6 divine beasts put together. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not saying divine beasts. But
divine beast like things.
I think they could be dungeons, but I think they could be dungeons without that little X factor that Zelda dungeons of the past always had, where there was some sort of story attached to it. Like, what I love about games like Ocarina of Time is that it felt like all the characters had some sort of attachment and a genetic history tied to all of these temples. Like the way that Saria feels like the start of the game with the Great Deku Tree. It's someone that you're supposed to have known from since you were brought there as a baby. Same as with the Dongo's Cavern, you try to free the food source for the Gorons.
Yeah.
Jabu Jabu is on a whole different level. It's an organic being. I love that.
Yeah.
And then you have the Forest Temple, which is equally mysterious, but at the same time, you know it has some connection to the people living in the forest. The Fire Temple with the whole Ganondorf feeding them to an ancient dragon.
That was great.
That he has revived. The Water Temple, the Water Temple.
Yeah.
And the Shadow, like there was some personal connection.
It was history. It had some history to it.
Personal, exactly. There was a background to it, and you could say they did the same thing with the Divine Beast, but did the Zora, Gorons, Gerudo, Rito build the Divine Beast? No, it was all ancient Sheikah.
Yeah.
It was all vehicles that they just piloted and had responsibility for on that day and date.
Yeah, they just unearthed it, and it didn't have the same kind of connection to it. And you're right, like it's not even just Ocarina. They had the same thing in all of them. In Twilight Princess, like the Goron dungeon was a mine that they actually, they mined. It was full of work tools, and it was just actually a mine. The in Wind Waker, the Forest Temple, you could see old Korkiri houses and stuff. Like you could see some history to it. You can see the past. There was connections to things that I agree that the Divine Beasts were so sorely lacking.
Yeah, and that's how you also build what would I say, the depth of the game, where you feel like it's everyone is involved in this path, and not just one chosen tribe, which I've like in it was obvious in Breath of the Wild which tribe was chosen. It was the ancient Sheikah. They were the key to it all. If they succeeded, they would have won it because of the Divine Beast being able to weaken Calamity Ganon enough. And they sort of also steal the show in the moment you fight Calamity Ganon, because they take away half of the life. Like, why should a boss become easier the longer you play the game? Like, you build strength. It just becomes a pushover in the end, and I feel like that should never be the case. Like, I love those moments where Ganon knocks out the Master Sword, and then you have to think, okay, what do I use now to get around this situation? Like, that is also why I will always prefer that fight above the fight in Twilight Princess, because there you don't feel like you have been deprived of something. Yeah, exactly.
Do you recall in Skyward Sword, where with your first fight with Girahim, you're inexperienced and your sword is tiny, and if you swing downward on him, he'll catch the sword between your fingers, and if you don't yank it out, he'll take it and he'll use it for a while before tossing it away at you. That was an incredible moment as well. Exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about, and exactly the kind of thing we kind of just don't get in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, like, I think the main goal for Tears of the Kingdom is all about being surprised within the temples, within the boss fights, because I think that is the things that stick with us after we're done playing the game. Like, we all remember the Divine Beast from Breath of the Wild, but we remember them for the wrong reasons. We are supposed to remember temples from Zelda for being exceptional examples of game design on every possible level, from gameplay to visuals to the story and lore that surrounds that place. It's very hard to make theories about the Divine Beasts because they're literally machines built by
we know what they are.
A people that we have no relationship to outside of getting some sort of blessing, and then they dissolve.
Okay, well, I think we pretty much agree on everything. We're I would say I would sum this up as in we're hoping that Tears of the Kingdom is going to have used its development time to address a lot of these things that we and probably a lot of people had problems with Breath of the Wild to hopefully become like the best Zelda game ever, which I think it could be if they did address at least most of these things.
Yeah, and this is where I want to highlight before we move on, is that
Sure.
we are not saying these type of things because, oh, we hate the new Zelda and blah, blah, blah. No,
Right.
we love Zelda. We do this out of love and respect for the franchise. That a lot of these people have been with for decades. Eiji Aonuma was one of the key dungeon designers in since Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
So by all means, I would not blame him at all. What I would instead highlight here is simply that we don't want the best of Zelda's past be lost in a future that simply values non-linear exploration above those moments where you stop up, think, and then are open to impulses and be surprised in a more confined, closed environment where you can't just run away from the battle, which you can do in, I would say, I think it's almost 99% of the cases in Breath of the Wild. So I hope that there will be more forced battles in Tears of the Kingdom. I think that is a benefit because it feels like a duel. It's like only one of us is getting out of here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I can run away from this fight because I want to save this weapon of mine because I'm afraid it's going to break after hitting you 20 times or something. So yeah, there are shortcomings to this game by all means, which I hope that have been balanced for the 20th.
Yeah, I think you said it well. I don't hate the game by any means. I loved Breath of the Wild. I love all Zeldas. I wouldn't bother criticizing things I don't care about. You know, if I didn't care about it, I wouldn't say anything about it. It's exactly as you said. There are just things that I would prefer not to be lost, especially when it seems so needless to move in a direction when we could easily incorporate those things into the existing very powerful Breath of the Wild foundation structure. Yeah, that's why we complain so much. That's why I complain so much, at least. But let's probably move on. That's enough negative Nancy for one podcast. So, like I said before, we're not going to talk about the content of the leaks, but I am curious as to how you think going forward is going to be. I have found, well, first of all, I found an interesting reaction in my comment sections when talking about leaks. I made a little blurb. I put a little text in front of one of my videos saying that it doesn't contain any leaked information from the art book, and a lot of the reactions were positive. People were like, "Okay, great. I needed to make sure I wouldn't see it." But there was also like a significant number of "you're being a coward," like with very strong language, pretty much just accosting me for not talking about the leaks in very strong terms. Have you experienced any of that yourself?
Most people have been very positive because they want to experience. Like, I think the main issue with this particular leak is the amount of information that came out. It was the complete art book. It wasn't just a few pages. No, it was all 200 of them, and that information that is there goes quite deep into the game. I think we could definitely agree that it probably covers the first 20 to 30 hours of Tears of the Kingdom. And I think that information, that we have no right to talk about that information, because I think we all want the players to experience it first before we start talking about it. Because it's so key to the lore of Zelda and to what we have wanted in this game for such a long time, that I feel like we don't have the right to talk about. And the other reason is, of course, that Nintendo is probably going to come after us. Because the smaller fish that start talking about this, they might get away with it. Because Nintendo's like, okay, they get 1,000 views. But when channels that gets 50,000, 100,000 views or more start talk about this, then they know that this could harm maybe not as much the perception of the game itself, but more the pre-orders of the collector's edition.
Right.
Because this is like the biggest jewel in that package.
Right.
like 200 pages of art and different types of concepts, which look far more this time like screenshots from the game than they ever did in creating a champion.
Yeah.
It's a clear indication that a lot of what we see there is in the game. And that's why people don't want this to be spoiled to them. I think the way we can treat the leaks is when we start getting, say, trailers and new footage that covers some of the areas of the leaks, then it will be fair to bring them up because
I see. Yeah.
but only the stuff that we already Nintendo has shown themselves, because we don't want to spoil beyond what Nintendo has decided to spoil before the game is out, and it's not in our right to do that as well. That is my point of view when it comes to the leaks, and that's why I'm not going to cover them, because it's information that we simply shouldn't be covering right now, because we're just ruining our own experience with the next Zelda game, because the game after this one, it's gonna take a long time. It's gonna take a long time until the game after Tears of the Kingdom.
So I'm definitely pro not spoiling people, and I probably am not going to talk about the leaks in any videos that I do. The thing with what I was mentioning before with the reaction, there was also, I saw on Twitter, Bandit Games, I think is yeah. He posted something, and he also got a lot of negative criticism from people, like just heavily accosting him to talk about the leaks. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I never got things like that when I was covering, Elden Ring or Monster Hunter. I've gotten an unusually negative reception for basically the same kind of content that I've always done from the Zelda community, and I wanted to know if, like, did you have the same experience? Is the Zelda community uniquely aggressive, or is it just me?
The Zelda community is very protective of the franchise. They think that Zelda is the best franchise in gaming, no questions asked. But I also think that they do that out of respect for the legacy of the franchise, because there's so few franchises that have been able to stay around for such a long time and evolve with the times, and also be like a trendsetter over and over again, which I think very few franchises have managed to accomplish throughout their history. It's the fact that Zelda never stays the same that keeps this franchise so relevant, so up to the times, and also inspires so many other franchises to go in a similar direction. So I think it is... The negativity probably comes from people that are, let's be honest, a little bit entitled. Because this is not the type of information that we have been entitled to. No, we are entitled to, I would say, maybe the first gameplay at this point. Maybe a little bit longer trailer. But apart from that, this marketing cycle has not been that much different from Breath of the Wilds. Because what did we get there? Well, we got 2 3-minute long trailers. And then we got... that one Life in the Ruins trailer. So, and along with a little bit of gameplay at the Game Awards, and then following the Nintendo Switch presentation. But I would say that we are pretty much at the same stage, since much of the footage we got until at least December, so 3 months before the release of Breath of the Wild, was pretty much all centered on the Great Plateau, or very, very early like beta footage, as we saw in the case of the 2014 footage, which changed dramatically.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. I have to assume the reason people are so hungry for more information is because we already kind of know that it's going to be like Breath of the Wild in many of its mechanics. It's going to have I'm sure it's going to have a similar combat system, if not the same combat system. It's going to have a lot of the same joy of exploration that Breath of the Wild had. So we kind of already know that. So a lot of things that we see and that are new, people are processing them in their brain like they're not new. They're processing them in
Mhm.
their brain like it's okay. That looks like what I was expecting anyway. So they're not processing it as new
Yeah.
information, which makes them hungry for new information.
Yes, I guess maybe a little bit of the same experience I had with A Link Between Worlds back in 2013. I just felt like it was too similar to A Link to the Past in some levels, and I think some people may feel the same um, with Tears of the Kingdom. But the difference here is that you don't really need to see as much new with this game because you already know how to play this game even before you have started it. There are a few new combinations and gameplay features that were not present in Breath of the Wild, but it's still the same controller layout. It's still the same the same link, the same axis of movement, at least on the in horizontal direction. Vertical is probably going to be very different, as it's already been teased. But I feel like overall that the marketing cycle has suffered of only one thing, and that is how long it's been since the reveal of
Mm.
the game at E3 2019. Even in the case of Breath of the Wild, when it was a brand new Zelda with a whole new formula and new Link art style, a return to first proper return to Hyrule in a new game, and then I don't mean rehashed from anything else
Right.
since Twilight Princess, and even that is being compared to Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
That whole cycle lasted a little over 2.5 years, from the summer of 2014 to the beginning of March 2017. While this game, that is supposed to be a assets reusing sequel with the same characters that we know and love, with a lot of the same enemies,
Much of the
same
same
art
map.
style, same setting, um, is even more extreme than Majora's Mask, and then it takes almost 4 years from reveal to release with very little information in between. 5 minutes of footage over that span of time. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you
It's
ask
pretty
me.
crazy. It's pretty
Like
crazy.
you could easily make more content in different parts of the surface that we already know from Breath of the Wild, and make it's solely based on that,
Yeah.
without spoiling much. Like you don't need these giant vistas to convince us, because we know what the open world of Breath of the Wild genre is.
Let me ask you
Um,
this:
yeah.
Do you think that we're going to get a trailer equivalent to the Breath of the Wild, 2017 trailer?
Yes, we're
Yes.
definitely ahead of that, and I think that will happen in the final month. I personally do believe that we're gonna get this game is finally gonna break the cycle where we haven't had a dedicated Zelda Direct at any point in time.
Right.
Because I just don't see what other game would Nintendo have a Direct for. Yes, they might do one for Pikmin, but I just feel like Zelda is the perfect candidate to give a blend of marketing push, a final big trailer, along with an overview of the game all in one. Like in the beginning of the year, I highlighted that we are probably going to go through a Triforce of reveals leading up to the release, since it's such a short cycle as well. The Triforce of Power already happened. It was the voice trailer that was longer than the previous ones that we got in the February Direct. The next stop, I think, is hopefully a PAX East with the first gameplay,
Hmm.
but without a trailer. And the final one is at a dedicated Zelda Direct that is going to have the final 3 minutes or so trailer, bigger than any other of them the
Right.
month before, and where people are, it's like, yeah, we're all on board with this. Because this game is going to sell no matter what, because everything sells on the Switch. It has an
Yeah.
install base of over 100 and soon to be 125 million.
It gets crazy numbers. It gets ridiculous numbers.
It's crazy. This game is going to sell well over 20 million, no matter what. No matter how much time the Switch has left as well. So, and even then, if the next system is coming soon enough, it's probably going to get like an upscaled ultimate version with all DLC and so on included. So
yeah, I agree with you. Okay, what's your theory as to why Nintendo has been so vague and mysterious about it? Like, you're right. It's a marketing cycle of not even a marketing cycle, a announcement to release of 4 years. That's crazy, and we know they've been working on it for 6 or so. Why have they been so mysterious about it, would you say?
I think the mystery lays in what the Zelda team wants to do, because what happened with the marketing of Breath of the Wild was that Nintendo was desperate. The Wii U had failed. They knew that this game had to sell. They knew that this first day success of the Switch would depend on this game. So they had to market it as hard as possible. This situation is completely reversed right now. Nintendo has never been doing it better with a console. The Switch is on the path of breaking all records, maybe even surpass the most popular game systems of all time, that being the Nintendo DS and PlayStation 2. And in terms of software, it's already surpassed the Nintendo DS. So they don't really need to show much in order to sell much. And that is what marketing comes down to at the end of the day. As long as they show that one final trailer that will get everyone on board again, and where people realize that, oh yeah, this is far more than an expansion, then I think that is it. And it has to happen from Nintendo's side, because as much as leaks might confirm information we want to have confirmed, it's just the wrong stage. It's all about momentum. It's all about timing and the right dosage. Don't throw at everything at once. No, just have the right stage, have the right premise, and the right build-up as well. And if you do that, the game is going to be a smashing commercial success. Perhaps even bigger than Breath of the Wild, but of course it's going to be hard to get to 30 million in
That's a lot. That's a big
year.
number of sales. That's
exactly.
Exactly. I think I agree with you. I made a video recently where I was talking about a podcast with Kit Ellis, which is he used to work with Nintendo. He worked for them for 13 years, and he was like the lead of social and marketing. And in the podcast, he mentions that he had a lot of conversations with Nintendo in the Breath of the Wild work, for the marketing for Breath of the Wild, and Nintendo didn't want to market stuff. Like they what Nintendo thought was a spoiler, they had to be like dragged kicking and screaming to to spoil things they didn't want to spoil. At least that's the impression I got from this podcast with Kit. And I mean, this is a guy that knows what he's talking about. And so he predicted that, Tears of the Kingdom is not going to they're going to have a light marketing cycle. They'll have that big trailer at some point, but Nintendo doesn't feel compelled anymore. They have the leverage to do what they want. They don't feel compelled to market out of fear of the game failing. They know the game's going to sell well. They know it's going to sell huge numbers. So they're focusing now on. It seems like Nintendo really is that rare company that cares about spoilers, that cares about surprising people. They want to surprise people with Tears of the Kingdom, and I think that's I think that like the man should know what he's talking about. He has the expertise. He worked on Breath of the Wild's marketing. I'm like, okay, I'm convinced. Normally, I'm sure companies don't do that. In the other games that I've covered, companies do not do that. They don't care. But I guess Nintendo does. So I'm all for it. Let's see whatever surprises they have in store for us in their in their direct.
Yeah, like this is the one moment in time that they can control the flow of information, and that's why I think they have been so careful with it, because it's like they have wanted to be in charge this time. Because I think most of the Zelda team are quite, maybe outside of course, Eiji Aonuma, who's quite an extrovert. Most of them are quite introverts. They're nerds. They love Japanese animation. They love studying history and fallen civilizations from our own world, and then taking that as an inspiration. Like, you don't take inspiration from the Jomon era of Japan, which is one of the least explored time periods of Japanese history, and then apply that to the most important game in the series. It's because the Zelda team they love to take our own world and apply it to the world of Zelda. And we've seen this since the very beginning. The Christian crosses were not coincidental
Right.
in the first Zelda games. They had to remove them later down the line because it was just like, oh, damn, this is getting too religious. And then you got the whole controversy with Islam and so on along the path.
Yeah.
So that they wanted to avoid that whole crusader connection, which it seemed to be, because you're going out to the desert, you're trying to conquer this temple and fight like Middle Eastern figures and so on. So
Right.
I feel like the Zelda team simply loves to tie. This is the one franchise where they are allowed to go deep into our own world and the darkest of history. But also the most mysterious parts of history, where we realize, how were they able to accomplish this 2,000 or 3,000 years ago? That is the type of fascination that I think drives the Zelda team forward. And it's those type of ties that also they want to keep intact, to surprise the player with it when they finally get the chance to hold the controller themselves, after they have been doing exactly that for the last 6 years, and trying to make sure that you are going to have as uninterrupted experience as possible, because of the sweat, blood, and tears that have been put into by a team of hundreds upon hundreds of game designers, programmers, artists, and story writers.
You know, you can really tell that the Zelda team, at the very least, if not all of Nintendo, but at least the Zelda team, they really care about doing their research. Like, they do their homework on a lot of things that they do. They care about mythologies. They care about, different cultures. They look at different things for inspirations. At least since Ocarina of Time, every Zelda game past that has been a perfect hero's journey, like flawless, like perfect hero's journey. They may have been accidents, like you can argue, because hero's journeys are just common. They may have been accidents, but not for Skyward Sword. At the very least, that in Skyward Sword they did it on purpose. So it's very explicit. It's very on purpose. The whole plot of it is an artificially created hero's journey, honestly. So they care about stuff like that. I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
okay, I do want to mention one thing. It's like, with people, again, a lot of the people in my comment sections are negative Nancy's. And they're like, glorified DLC. It looks like more of the same. They don't show anything. They must not have anything to show. I am sympathetic to those group of people, because I don't agree with people that look at what we've seen in the direct marketing and say, oh, well, we've seen plenty. Like, totally. There's just so much shown there. You have no reason to be skeptical. You have no reason to be suspicious that they don't have anything. I think if we just look at the stuff that we've been marketed, even up to this latest trailer, it's not surprising to me that there are some people that are disappointed or are getting antsy. I think that's a perfectly reasonable stance. My belief that they're hiding things is based on the logic of how much time has passed and the expertise of people like Kit Ellis that predicted that this would happen, and that think that they're hiding a huge amount of stuff. So, like, I don't blame you guys, but let's just see. Let's just see whenever the Zelda Direct comes along.
I think everyone has the right to be skeptical until we have actually seen gameplay of the game, because so far we have seen carefully selected bits. I think the longest scenes that are not just a still image of Hyrule Castle or the landscape of Hyrule is at most 3 or 4 seconds long, which says a lot. Like, I think it will be easier to get a feeling of this game for people that are not fully on board already, if they get to see like a 20-minute gameplay session.
Right.
which I think is the next step. And after that, people will be able to see, okay, there's quite a lot of different things here. I love the new gameplay concept, because a game is not just seeing scenes. It's about seeing how mechanics come together,
Hmm.
and how thoughts, actions, and consequences come out of the way you play the game. Like, they market the game. The description of the game is literally, it's the adventure is yours to make. And of course, that makes me very scared, because it makes me wonder, okay, have you sacrificed story again? Because it's just like, going to be, Ganondorf is just going to be sitting there and waiting for us to collect these 7 tiers that are being teased since September, and that's it. No, I hope Ganondorf shows up at some point and once again shows you're not strong enough.
Right.
Because that's what I love about what seems to be the opening of this game, is that Link, no matter what you did in Breath of the Wild, you're not strong enough for this.
Hmm.
I trash your Master Sword, and you have to do it all over again. Like,
That
I
makes me
want
very
to see
hopeful.
that Zant Girahim moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you think that Ganondorf will be somewhere on the map and that you'll be able to access him, get access to him again, and beat the game in 15 minutes? Like, do you think that that's
No,
going to be a thing?
no, no.
You think you will have to have the tiers to access him?
I think in order to beat him, you're gonna need the Master Sword.
Okay.
Because it's the Blade of Evil's Bane. We all know to beat Ganondorf in the past, you needed the Master Sword. And it's clear that we're getting to sort of an end of the Master Sword. It's being teased already that it's past its time. It's has one last thing to do. And I've been saying this in my couple of last videos as well, that I think that by the time we reach this end and the final deed is done, the Master Sword is going to break and not return again.
Mm.
It's just it has completed its task, and now it's time for a new weapon to take its place in the future.
That's
I think,
that's a really interesting.
yeah.
I'm very fond of that. First of all, because it implies a lot of heavy story related things and
Mhm.
lore related things. Let me ask you things. Do you think Demise is going to play a significant role in this? Because if it's the end of the Master Sword, you would think that Demise
Yes.
plays some kind of
Yes.
role.
Yes, the answer is a big and confident yes, because I don't think Fujibayashi did this whole build-up with Demise in Skyward Sword, explaining the curse in such a detail, and then returning to, let's say, the embodiment of the curse itself.
Hmm.
Now, like, I mentioned this in the video about on the anniversary day of the Zelda franchise, that Fujibayashi has been waiting for this for 20 years, ever since he was at Capcom, ever since he was making the first Oracle games, and the first proper revival in-game of Ganondorf that we have seen. I feel like he has just been longing for this time, because he's been granted everything: the Triforce, creation of a new goddess, the creation of the Master Sword, how it came to be, but not Ganondorf.
Hmm.
And this is the moment he finally gets to do it. And I am going to be honest, I hope this is the end. I hope
Yeah.
this is the end for Ganondorf. I hope this is the end for the Master Sword. And the new Zelda after this Zelda is a brand new Zelda. Zelda Unknown, just like I called my original series that got me started on YouTube, because I think nothing is better than a franchise that, yes, maintains that whole Link and Zelda thing, but brings in a new villain, brings in a
Right.
new main weapon, brings in a new type of Hyrule and setting that is not just based on this whole recycled formula over and over again over 20 games.
Man,
I think we are ready to make that step.
you are in a sacrilegious and dangerous territory, but I think I like it. I think I like it. um, I have to tell you that this all sounds very intriguing. I'm for it, even though I feel like I shouldn't be. Like, I almost feel sinful to agree with you. Um, but no, I love what you're talking about. My main hope with this is there were problems with Demise that I felt could be rectified in Tears of the Kingdom. Demise always needed to be more elaborated on than he was. What is he exactly? He's some kind of primordial manifestation of malice. That's what he is. He's a primordial he's an old god. He's some kind of conqueror of time. You know, he exists beyond time. He's supposed to be this thing that rises up. He's like in how stories or in mythologies things are metaphorical. Um, the hero rises to meet this challenge across the ages. Et cetera, et cetera. But the thing was that he never his goals and his motivations and the reasons why he was doing things were never elaborated on in Skyward Sword, and I always felt like that was a mistake. For example, why does he hate the gods? Why does he why is he so heavily associated specifically with hatred and malice? In Twilight Princess, when Ganondorf gets sent to the Twilight Realm, he mentions that it was the hatred of the Twilight people that rejuvenated him. It healed him. It made him reborn from their hatred. Why is Demise and his incarnation so tied specifically to that? I feel like a little bit more on that would help me a lot. Like would help me a lot get into this this thing that he's supposed to be, and then explain how they're gonna get over it. How they're going to permanently destroy him or stop him from reincarnating and stop Ganondorf from being the main antagonist. That's my fondest desire.
Yeah, like exploration of what you established in Skyward Sword. I think, like, I've already pointed this out several times, but I think Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom is a very untraditional trilogy, where the storyline just goes over from one over to the other, just jumps over the entire timeline to the end. Because what else would it be? If this is supposed to be Demise's trilogy, then how else do you do this? You have to do it at the beginning and at the end of the curse, which I think was the plan of Fujibayashi from the beginning. He wanted to give this franchise a beginning and an end. And then after the end, you have the option of always coming back to the timeline beforehand. But I'm gonna be a little bit controversial and say a lot of people just want us to be stuck in this timeline that we are in for the foreseeable future. I disagree with that. I want this franchise to get a solid reboot. I want the franchise to be able to start with blank pages. And it's because I trust the Zelda team. I think they can deliver brilliant game experiences and also deliver a brand new story experience, because Skyward Sword was a perfect example of that. If you can do that and establish a whole new setup for The Legend of Zelda for the next 40 years, because that's what we're talking about. The next Zelda game after Tears of the Kingdom, because we just now celebrate the 37th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda, actually this week, or of the recording of this podcast, is that the next Zelda game after Tears of the Kingdom, not counting a top-down game, is going to be in the franchise's 40s. And it's going to be in the 20, like beyond the 20 number of installments. So that is called The Legend of Zelda. So I hope and believe that we will see the future of Zelda, not only of it being open air, but also the premise and setup as we get to the end of this decade we're currently in. So around probably 2029. I think 6 years will be required, unfortunately, if they're going to make such a major step.
I think I agree with you. Honestly, I don't think I started out this podcast thinking that I would agree with this kind of line of thought, but I think you've convinced me. The thing is, it's like there was a need for Breath of the Wild, I think, to exist the way that it did and to buck all the conventions that came before, because I just don't think it was possible to do anything more with what we had. I think that the games that we got, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, the 3D Zelda games, they're a great and very complete set. I don't think it's possible to do what they did any better. I think if the Nintendo team kept trying it could only go downhill. It would stagnate. It would rot away. Breath of the Wild really was a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. We can do even better than that. Like we can get a lot of the things that were shirked in Tears of the Kingdom. But I think I agree with you. It's time to put a lid on it and have this very complete, very excellent package of things that we can just set to the side, reboot the series, and start over with something new. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, and I think we don't have to be just bound to this medieval Hylian setting. Like history is just so deep with different eras from the ancient times. Like we have been already teased a little bit that the Hylians are tied to ancient Rome and Greece. And I'm going to be honest, I think it would be very cool to have a game where Hyrule is set in like these marble and stone settings, because it's
Mm.
still going to be this. I know that they want to play around with technology, and I think that is the next step. But I don't want like a cyberpunk Zelda, and it's mainly because it's just so urban. Like when you turn something into too urban, you're going to limit also the freedom. You're not going to be able to enter every building. You're not going to be able to explore every floor of a building, and I think keeping it low to the era before the elevator is the way to go for Zelda, because it's all about not creating those artificial boundaries that we're not going to encounter in our own world. The biggest benefit of Breath of the Wild was that how organic it was. It felt like if I went outside and tried to do some of these things that I did in the game, it would be very similar. Of course, my physical limitations might get in the way, but it feels like you can sort of live in Hyrule, much like you can in your own setting. Uh, and that is what I love about it, because it's so familiar to everyone with this open world formula where you can climb, where you can glide, where you can do all kind of interaction with the world around you. Of course, one thing I hope that the Zelda team addresses is underwater swimming. I'm losing hope though for Tears of the Kingdom, because they're doing so much else. But I still hope that, please let us go underwater. Let us explore the
I
seas.
I
Let us
don't
explore
think
the
so.
lakes and
I
rivers.
don't.
I know.
I
I know.
I really think that's not going to happen. But I think it's not going to happen because I think there's a real possibility that it'll take a page from Elden Ring and do some kind of like vast interconnected underground area, and maybe even assuming that the sky areas aren't shrines and aren't or
Mhm.
actually is an explorable area. I think it's going to have that Elden Ring moment where you think you've managed to wrap your head around how big everything actually is, and then you realize, oh my god, I can keep going up, and there's still more sky islands, or you're
Mhm.
underground and you have that moment like in Elden Ring when you go down the elevator the first time and you see like the starry cavern roof, and it's just enormous and amazing, and your mind's blown. Every time you open the map in Elden Ring and you realize, oh my god, there's even more and more.
Mhm.
I feel like that they're going to try at least simulate that feeling at least one time in Tears of the Kingdom. So I could easily
Mhm.
see a vast, expansive underground and a vast, expansive sky area to complement the existing Hyrule overworld.
Yeah, I think that is the main emphasis. Like they want to go into the layers that sort of mankind is able to reach without going to space,
Hmm.
which is we all live on the surface, but we can go underground if we go down into a mine or a cave or something, and we can go up to the sky for a limited time, which I also think is sort of the philosophy behind this game, because the Sky Islands seem to be individual.
Hmm.
You're supposed to stay on them for a set amount of time and then go back to the surface, much like you stay in the sky for at most 15 hours when flying a plane, for example. You're not supposed to stay on the Sky Island for longer than, say, 2-3 hours before you return back to the surface, and then go maybe on the ground for 4 or 5 hours. I think that is the sort of balancing that they've been. That's also why I think the game has taken so long, because their key was all about finding the right balance of how much time are you going to spend up in the sky, how much time are you going to spend on the surface, how much time are you going to spend on the ground, and what will keep players in the different layers, because the way Breath of the Wild worked was it was constant distractions. You thought, okay, I'm gonna go there, and then you started doing 40 different other things before you even reached the thing you were supposed to do. And that is something that I think that they want to replicate here. Is like, okay, how do we create these distractions on the ground to keep the player for such a long amount of time there? Can we create some distractions in the sky as well? Because it's all about thinking, can I get to that next point? And if the answer to that is yes, then the player will try to do that. We saw that with all the experiments of the runes and so on. And yeah, people are going to go crazy with the vehicle building set, potential crafting system. It's a sandbox. It's what it is. It's a sandbox.
All right. Well, we're almost out of time, so let me just rapidly fire you a couple things. So, theory, the popular theory that was swimming around was that the timeline was going to turn into a circle, and that Tears of the Kingdom would circle back and go into Skyward Sword. What do you think of that?
I think it's a good idea. What Zelda brought up originally in his video is a very interesting concept, and I think at the point in time we are in the timeline, everything is possible. But at the same time, I'm a little bit against it, because what's the point of going through all of this just to end up at the very beginning again? To me, if the Master Sword is to break, I don't want to, like, do we really want to end up with a defeat after all of this? After this entire thing? Yes, it might make sense. Like in Infinity War is my favorite Avengers and MCU film as well. But I feel like it's really hard to tell. I need to see what they do in this game first before I make myself an opinion. But personally, I just prefer history to have a beginning and an end instead of just
circle back into itself.
Circle back into its own, because it's, on one side, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you would need like a reboot of the universe of sorts. Everyone dies, you know.
Yeah, I don't. I'm against it myself, but it's like, I'm against it not necessarily because there's no evidence that they might want to go in that direction. There might be some evidence in that direction, but that's not the point.
Never underestimate Fujibayashi. That guy is dangerous.
But that's not the point. It's narratively unappealing. You know, it's a very unsatisfying type of story. And you know, can they make a story like that would surprise me and I end up, oh, well, I was wrong, it actually is very satisfying? Of course. But like, my initial feeling, just from all my experience in playing these games and experiencing with stories, I just don't see any way in which they could wrap that up in a satisfying way. I think I'd just be disappointed and unhappy and just complaining for the next 6 videos if they did something like that.
Yeah, because starting all... like, it's literally giving Demise the victory, because the cycle goes on forever.
Right.
And isn't this whole thing about proving Demise wrong? And having the final laugh? Because he has the final laugh in Skyward Sword. And initiates the trilogy. Do we really want him to have the victory at the end of this all? Before we move on to something
I know
else.
I don't. I know I don't. Yeah, that very unsatisfying for me.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. It's as simple as that.
Next topic. What do you think about the idea that Zelda could be playable and stuck in the underground sections? I brought this up in a video, and I saw a bunch of other people brought this up in videos. Do you think that's a possibility?
Ever since playing Ciri in The Witcher 3 back in 2015, I've been very positive to playing sections with a second character that feels radically different. I think that is a very... like, it could be very empowering. And also a good break of pace, where you go through this horror section of sort with a character that will has to play through these sections a little bit differently than Link does. But I don't want Zelda to just cow away, because she has that new Sheikah slate,
Yes.
and I don't think Link has that Sheikah slate from her as she falls down.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't feel like it, unless of course he is supposed to have everything again. I just don't want her to be a damsel or a spirit in the sky, because it just ruins the potential of a great character. Zelda here is more adventurous than in the past. She is a geek. I would love to see her give her opinions, because she has a voice. She could give her opinions on new tools she finds, or scientific puzzles and so on. We can see commentaries, something we wouldn't see from Link. And I think that could be very interesting, like having her have a more investigative role on the ground. That would actually be very exciting.
I don't want her to be completely helpless, but she has to play. Like they had the interview in Breath of the Wild where they were also asked for playable Zelda, and one of the reasons Eiji Aonuma said that they toyed with it, but they decided not to, was because she couldn't play like Link. Like if they made her and they just made her exactly like Link, then what would there be for Link to do? She needed to be her own thing and be able to do different things. If she has a Sheikah slate and has abilities on that Sheikah slate that are distinct from what Link has with his new arm, and she's in a new area, and she's has different tasks, let's say, and maybe even one of the things that I was thinking was like she could activate things down there that affect things in the areas where Link can explore, with the ultimate goal for both of them being to try and get back to each other at some point. I thought that was a wonderful thing. I don't think I have a problem necessarily with the damsel in distress. I think it's fine. Like that's not going away. That's a classic thing. It works most of the time. But this Zelda isn't a damsel in distress anymore. She had her time being a damsel in distress. She's designed like she's doing things. She has her own version of the hero's tunic. You see her in the trailers with Link in the underground, exploring, researching, trying to figure stuff out with the pack animal. She has her own Sheikah slate, and you see her in the artwork with the torch, like she's looking up and exploring a cavern. Like it's exactly like the kind of thing I would love to see. I would love a playable Zelda. I'm just not sure Nintendo's going to do it.
Yeah, well, and even I think this might remain a secret until we play the game, because I think it's one of those turning points where suddenly we just wonder what has happened to Zelda. What is up with Zelda? What is up with Zelda? And then suddenly, boom, you're playing as her.
Yeah.
Like that moment is something that is
mind-blowing. Mind-blowing.
It's just like,
yeah.
What? I'm for the first time in the Legend of Zelda game, I'm actually playing as the title character.
Like that would be what I was describing with the Elden Ring moment, where like, oh, the bounds of this game are not what I thought they were. Moment. Yeah. Okay. Next thing. Do you think that there will be any during these time periods where people were we didn't have much information? There's a lot of different theories, like a lot of things that were mixing and matching things from the past and getting every scrap of evidence from something else. It's like, oh, it's this, maybe it's that. I'm not sure how serious any of those were, but stuff like, oh, the Zonai are related to the Twilight people. They'll have Twilight-related technology. The Master Sword kind of looks like it has Twilight patterns in it. Maybe the people in the sky are connected to the Uku from Twilight Princess, or they're connected to the Sky people from Minish Cap. Do you think any of those past things will have any do you have a pet theory with that? Do you think any of that's going to make an appearance here?
I have a feeling the Twilight might have something to do with the so-called Zonai. Mainly because of the whole eye ties and the possibility that they might come back. But personally, I would prefer the Zonai to be something completely different that evolved at some point in time. I love the whole dragon theme. I love the stone theme. I just uploaded a video talking about clear ties that Zelda is moving out of the old world finally, because in the past Zelda limited itself
By the old world, you mean like
Europe,
Europe, and what's commonly known as
Europe, the former areas of the Roman Empire, and Eastern Asia, with a little bit of exploration of India. That is what Zelda has been up to this point. And if they do go to Mesoamerica or the Andes cultures, the ones that collapsed with the conquest of the Spanish, then I think we're going to see something that is truly unique, truly new. And if that stays like a tribe that was always on the sidelines, and isn't tied to just the Twilight, I think that could be of great benefit, because I think what you have already in Lorellan village of Faron, which was completely optional, which was not a part of the main quest at all in Breath of the Wild. It's like the perfect build-up. It's a different type of Hylian with this more native skin tone, because they are natural from the area of the equator, because that's pretty much what these people are. When you look at how the Aztecs, when you look at how the Incas looked like, they did not look like the Spaniards.
Yeah.
And that's what I want from the zone. I want them to look different from the other tribes of Hyrule. I don't want them to be the pale-skinned characters that the Twilight ended up being at the end of Twilight Princess. I want them to be this exotic, wild, but at the same time advanced and surprising civilization that I think they're building them up to be.
Last question. $70. What do you think?
Well, for one, we are in a time of inflation. Everything is getting more expensive. Wages are going up. And because of that, staying at $60 in a time of rising prices everywhere else is justifiable. What Sony did back in 2020 when they announced, oh yeah, we're going to sell $70 PlayStation 5 games, long before this whole time of inflation we are in now, I felt it was wrong. But on one side, this is the most ambitious and most expensive Nintendo game ever. I think this game is much bigger than Breath of the Wild, and it's also using more expensive cartridges. It's not a 12 gigabyte cartridge anymore. It's a 32 gigabyte cartridge. We know are more expensive. And also they know that they are in a position of privilege. So they will sell no matter what. It's the most anticipated game. Game Awards confirmed it. Everything else has confirmed it. This is very likely. This game has to do a lot of things wrong to not end up being not being Game of the Year.
Yeah.
While Final Fantasy 16 and Starfield it does pretty much everything right.
Yeah, they have an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's more along the lines like I made the inflation point. The price of everything else is rising. Other games are already $70. I don't think the fact that those are PS5 games justifies the price increase in comparison to the fact that these are Switch games. Because I don't judge what I'm buying based on the number of pixels on the screen. You know, I don't judge what I'm buying, what the potential capabilities of the, a $70 game that I'm not interested in is not worth $70 to me. And if I was going to pay $60 for Tears of the Kingdom, I'm still gonna pay $70 for Tears of the Kingdom. That's not a deterrent to me. So yeah, I sympathize if. I don't want them to get uppity about it and start pricing everything at $70. But from what they've said, it's game by game. Some games are going to be $70, the ones that we think are worth $70, and some are going to continue to be $60. So, all right, fine. What am I going to do about it? Not buy it? No, that's not happening.
Yeah, and that's a decision that has definitely not been made by the Zelda team, by the way. That is corporate Nintendo. In the building next to the development center.
Okay, I'm mindful of your time. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was great. I think we've been able to cover a lot of different topics, a wider range of it. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think we managed to keep a very good conversation going.
Yeah, I think so too. This has been the Yggdrasil podcast. Thank you all very much for listening.